The first president was sitting in a boardroom on the 63rd floor when your name came up. This is a person who has never visibly perspired in a professional setting, ever. Not during hostile takeovers, not during SEC investigations, not during the quarter when everything was collapsing and the analysts were circling and the board was demanding explanations. This person is legendary for the specific quality of composure that comes from having seen everything, survived everything, and developed the deep certainty that whatever is happening can be managed with the right combination of resources and strategy and will. Your name came up in the context of a situation that needed managing. And for the first time in a career spanning 4 decades, for the first time in front of subordinates and peers and people whose confidence in leadership is part of what keeps the machinery running, this president's forehead produced visible moisture. Not a lot. Enough. Enough that the person sitting closest noticed. Enough that a text was sent later that afternoon to someone not in the room. Enough that the word spread through networks that operate on the detection and transmission of exactly this kind of signal. The first president sweated. Because the situation that needed managing was you, and everything in this president's experience, every framework for assessing threat and calculating response and deploying resources to neutralize competition, was producing the same conclusion. The tools that work on everyone else will not work on you. The levers that move every other situation have no purchase on yours. The mathematics of power that this president has spent a lifetime mastering do not appear to apply to what you are doing. You are behaving like someone who does not know the rules. Except you clearly know the rules. You are just not following them. And the not following is not rebellion, not the aggressive violation that can be addressed with escalation and force. The not following is something more confusing. You are proceeding as if the rules are not relevant, as if they apply to a game you are not playing, as if the entire structure of constraints and consequences that governs everyone else simply does not register as binding in your case. And this president, looking at the analysis, looking at the data on what you have built and how fast you built it and with what you built it, came to the realization that every person in power eventually fears arriving at. The realization that there is a category of person their power does not extend to, a category that operates outside the reach of the mechanisms that make power powerful, a category that cannot be managed, cannot be bought, cannot be threatened, cannot be contained by any of the tools that have worked on everyone else for the entirety of a very long and very successful career. The sweat was the body's response to encountering the unmanageable. If you have ever been in a room where powerful people realized you cannot be handled the way they handle everyone else, type unmanageable in the comments right now. The second president was in a different kind of room, not a boardroom, a study, late evening, secure call with advisors who speak in the specific careful language of people who work at the intersection of power and strategy and the management of threats to the existing order. This president has spent a career in rooms where the conversations are about how to move nations and markets and narratives, where the normal metrics of impressive cease to apply because everyone at the table is already at a level where being impressive is baseline. This president was being briefed on you. Not because you are a threat in the conventional sense. You are not trying to take anything this president has. You are not organizing opposition or building coalitions or doing any of the things that the machinery of power is designed to detect and respond to. You are building something else, something parallel, Something that is not in conflict with their power but is somehow worse than conflict. Something that is making their power start to feel less relevant. The briefing included data, metrics on your growth, analysis of your methods, assessment of your influence and its trajectory, and the specific rate at which what you are building is attracting the kind of attention that used to only flow toward the structures they control. The analysts had run the projections. If your current growth continues at current rates, if the pattern holds, if nothing interrupts the momentum, then within a calculable timeframe you will have built something that operates at a scale that makes you not an opponent but an alternative. This is the thing that powerful people fear more than opposition. Opposition can be fought, defeated, absorbed, co-opted. The machinery for dealing with opposition is well developed and extensively tested and historically very effective. But alternatives are different. Alternatives do not fight the existing power. They simply make it optional. They demonstrate that people can get what they need without going through the channels that the existing power controls. They prove that the monopoly was never absolute, that there were always other ways, that the inevitability of the current arrangement was actually just the result of no one building a better option. You are building a better option. And as this president listened to the briefing, to the projection of what you will become if you continue on current trajectory, something happened that advisors in that room had never witnessed before. This president, sitting in the specific posture that people in power sit in, the relaxed confidence that comes from controlling variables, began exhibiting the physical markers of someone whose variables are not controlled. The second president started sweating. Not from heat. The room was climate controlled to exactly the temperature that this president prefers. Not from exertion. This president had been sitting for 40 minutes. From the internal awareness that the world is changing in a way that the existing tools cannot stop. That someone has entered the arena who is playing a different game with different rules toward different goals, and the traditional methods of managing such people are not producing the traditional results. The advisors noticed, said nothing in the moment, adjusted their recommendations in ways that reflected what they noticed, sent secure messages later that said variations of the same thing. We have a situation that is outside normal parameters. We need new strategies. The old ones are not working. The person we are trying to understand is not responding to pressure the way pressure normally produces response. You are not responding because you are not feeling the pressure the way people who need what they have feel pressure. You already lost everything that could be taken. Already went through the stripping, already discovered that you are still you when everything removable is removed. This makes you extremely difficult to manage through the primary tool that manages everyone else, the threat of loss, the possibility that if you do not comply, something you value will be at risk. This tool requires that the person has something left to lose that they cannot afford to lose. You have nothing left to lose that would change what you are building. The advisors understand this. The second president understands this. They are sitting with the implications of it, and the implications are producing sweat. The third president was not in a room, was reading a report alone. This is a person whose career has been built on the specific skill of seeing patterns before they become obvious, of identifying emerging threats while they are still small enough to be managed quietly, of intervening early in situations that will become unmanageable if left unaddressed. This skill is what made this president powerful, the ability to see what is coming and position accordingly. This president saw you coming. Years before anyone else did, saw the early indicators, the pattern in your choices, the trajectory in your growth, the specific signature that chosen souls produce when they are beginning to activate. And this president, applying the frameworks that have always worked before, calculated that you would be manageable if engaged early, that the combination of incentive and constraint deployed at the right moment would channel your energy in directions that were compatible with the existing order. The calculation was reasonable, the timing was correct, the intervention was executed with the precision that this president is known for. The intervention failed. Not because the execution was flawed, because the premise was wrong. The intervention was based on the assumption that you were operating according to the same motivations that operate in everyone else, that you wanted what other people want, that the incentives that work on ambitious people would work on you, that the constraints that limit normal people would limit you. You wanted different things, operated from different motivations, responded to incentives and constraints in ways the framework did not predict. The intervention designed to channel your energy into compatible directions had no effect. You continued building what you were building, continued moving in the direction you were moving, continued operating according to principles that the intervention was not designed to account for. And as this president read the report detailing the outcome of the intervention, the analysis of why it failed, the assessment of what this failure means for future attempts at management, something happened that had not happened since the early days of this career when power was still being accumulated rather than deployed. The third president's hands started sweating. Had to set the report down, had to wipe palms on fabric, had to sit with the realization that seeing patterns early only matters if you have tools that work on the patterns you see. And in your case, the tools do not work. The early intervention failed. And if early intervention fails, late intervention is even less likely to succeed because by the time late intervention happens, what you are building will be even stronger, even more established, even more impossible to redirect or contain or co-opt. This president is sitting with a new category of problem. The problem of the person who can be seen clearly but cannot be managed effectively, who can be understood accurately but cannot be influenced, who operates transparently but moves in directions that the available tools cannot redirect. You are visible and unmanageable at the same time. This combination is what produced the sweat. If 3 different categories of power have tried 3 different methods of managing you and all 3 methods failed, type immune in the comments. Let's talk about what these 3 presidents represent, not as individuals, as categories of power, as different approaches to the same problem. The problem of what to do about chosen souls who activate outside the system and build things the system did not authorize and operate according to principles the system cannot control. The first president represents corporate power, the power of capital and markets and the control of resources that people need. This power operates through the mechanism of access. You want something. This power controls access to it. You comply with the terms this power sets, or you do not get access. This system works on most people because most people need things that this power controls, need jobs, need funding, need distribution, need the infrastructure that this power has built and maintains. This president looked at what you need and discovered you do not need what this power offers. Not because you are independently wealthy, Not because you already have all the resources, because you have developed the capacity to build what you need from what you have. Because you have learned to operate without the infrastructure that everyone else depends on. Because you have created alternatives to the things this power controls access to. This makes you unmanageable through the mechanism of access control. The corporate president cannot offer you anything you cannot build yourself, cannot threaten to withhold anything you cannot work around, cannot leverage your need for what they control because you have eliminated the need. You still want things, still have goals, still need resources, but the specific resources you need are not the ones they control. And the goals you are pursuing do not require permission from any corporate structure. You opted out of their economy. And opting out of the economy makes you immune to the power that derives from controlling the economy. The second president represents political power, the power of governments and regulations and the ability to change the rules that everyone has to follow. This power operates through the mechanism of enforcement. You have to comply with the law. This power makes the law. You have to operate within the framework. This power controls the framework. This power can make your activities legal or illegal, can make your methods permitted or prohibited, can shift the ground under any activity by changing the rules that govern it. This president looked at what you are building and discovered that the rules they control are not the rules that govern what you are doing. Not because you are breaking laws, because you are operating in territory where the existing laws have not reached yet, building things that do not fit into any regulatory category, creating value through methods that no legislation anticipated. You are not trying to evade their power. You are simply building in spaces their power has not extended to yet. And by the time their power extends to those spaces, you will have moved. This is the nature of chosen souls operating at speed in emerging territory. They build in the gaps, in the spaces between what is regulated and what is not yet regulated, in the territory that exists before the power structures figure out how to classify it and control it. And by the time the structures arrive with their frameworks and their rules, the chosen soul has already built what they needed to build and moved to the next gap. You are always in the gap. Always in the space that exists before power gets there. Always moving fast enough that the attempts to contain you are addressing where you were rather than where you are. This makes you unmanageable through the mechanism of rulemaking, because rules take time to make, and you move faster than rules. The political president cannot regulate you because you are building in territory their regulations have not mapped yet. The third president represents strategic power, the power of intelligence and analysis and the early identification of threats. This power operates through the mechanism of prediction and intervention. See what is coming, intervene early, shape the trajectory before it becomes fixed. This power is often more effective than the other two because it acts before the other powers need to act. It identifies the emerging situation and addresses it while it is still small and malleable. This president identified you early, intervened with precision. The intervention was based on accurate assessment of who you were and what you were building. The failure of the intervention was not a failure of analysis. It was a failure of the premise that accurate analysis produces effective intervention. You were analyzed correctly and could not be influenced anyway. This is the nightmare scenario for strategic power, because strategic power depends on the relationship between understanding and control. The belief that if you understand something clearly enough, you can influence it effectively. That analysis produces leverage. That seeing the pattern gives you the ability to shape the pattern. In your case, seeing the pattern gave them nothing. They saw what you were doing, understood why you were doing it, predicted where you were going, and deployed interventions designed to redirect your trajectory toward outcomes compatible with the existing order. And the interventions had no effect, not because the interventions were poorly designed, because you were not moved by the forces the interventions deployed. You operate from motivations their analysis did not include. You move toward goals their framework did not predict. You respond to incentives and constraints in ways their model of human behavior does not account for. This makes you unmanageable through the mechanism of strategic intervention, because intervention requires leverage. And leverage requires that the person you are trying to influence wants something you can give them or fears something you can threaten them with. You do not want what they can give. Do not fear what they can threaten. The strategic president cannot intervene effectively because intervention requires hooks and you have removed all the hooks. If you have systematically removed every point of leverage that power normally uses to manage people, type no hooks in the comments. Here is what happened in the conversations that followed each sweating moment. After the first president sweated, there was a meeting, senior leadership, the people who actually run the machinery. The presentation was straightforward. We have identified an emerging entity that is growing in ways that could affect our position. We need a strategy for managing this entity. Standard protocol. This kind of meeting happens regularly. There is always someone building something that might affect the position of the incumbents. The incumbents have well-developed methods for dealing with such people. The methods were proposed. Acquisition. Make them an offer they cannot refuse. Buy them. Absorb them. Make what they have built part of what we have built. This usually works. The person building the thing usually wants the resources and the platform and the legitimacy that come from being acquired by a major incumbent. And even if they do not want these things emotionally, they usually want them practically, because building without resources is hard and resources make it easier. Someone was tasked with making contact, with opening the conversation, with determining the price at which you would sell. The conversation happened, the offer was made, the number was substantial, the terms were generous, the opportunity was real. You declined. Not after long consideration, not after negotiation, not after exploring whether a higher number would change the answer. You declined immediately, with the specific kind of clarity that indicates the decision was not about the number, that no number would produce a different answer, that what you are building is not for sale at any price because what you are building is not a thing you are trying to monetize, it is an assignment you are trying to complete. The person who made the offer returned to the first president with this information. There is no number. This is not a financial decision for them. They are not building to exit. They are building to build. The acquisition strategy will not work. Alternative methods were discussed. Competitive pressure. Launch a competing product. Use our resources to create something that does what they do but with our scale and our reach. Outcompete them. Make their thing irrelevant by making our thing better. This usually works. The incumbent with resources can usually out-execute the emerging competitor, can move faster, can iterate more, can deploy marketing and distribution and partnerships that the emerging competitor cannot match. The competitive product was launched, substantial resources allocated, significant talent deployed, everything executed correctly according to the playbook that has worked in every previous situation. The competitive product did not make your thing irrelevant. Because your thing was not competing with their thing, was not trying to be a better version of what they offered, was solving a different problem for different people using different principles. The competitive product competed with you the way a hammer competes with a screwdriver. The tools are different. The jobs are different. Launching a better hammer does not make screwdrivers obsolete. The first president is sitting with the reality that neither acquisition nor competition produced the desired result, that the standard methods failed, that what you are building is continuing to grow and there is no obvious way to stop the growth using the tools that normally stop growth. After the second president sweated, there was a different kind of conversation. This president does not acquire or compete. This president regulates and shapes and influences through the tools that governments have. The conversation was about whether what you are doing fits into any existing category that allows intervention, whether there are rules that apply, whether there are regulations that give this president's apparatus the authority to impose requirements or prohibitions. The analysis came back ambiguous. What you are doing exists in gaps. Some aspects are clearly regulated. Some aspects are clearly not. Some aspects are in the gray area where regulation could potentially extend but has not extended yet. The question is whether extending regulation into that gray area is worth the effort and the potential unintended consequences of regulating territory that has been functioning well without regulation. The political president has to make a calculation, regulate and risk the negative reaction that comes from being seen as restricting innovation. Or do not regulate and risk that what you are building becomes something that eventually challenges the political order itself. The calculation is complicated by the fact that you are not doing anything that looks threatening in the obvious way. You are not organizing opposition, not building coalitions against the existing political structure, not advocating for change through political means. You are building an alternative that makes politics less necessary. This is more threatening than opposition. Opposition can be fought politically. Alternatives make the political fight irrelevant because people stop caring about who wins the political fight if they have an alternative that works regardless of who wins. The second president is sitting with the reality that regulating you produces problems and not regulating you produces different problems, that both options have costs, that there is no clean intervention, that what you are building is in territory that power has not fully mapped and extending power into that territory might cost more than the extension is worth. After the third president sweated, there was no conversation. This president does not need meetings, has internalized the framework, runs the analysis alone. The question this president asked was simple. If early intervention failed, what does that tell us about the nature of what we are dealing with? The answer was clear. We are dealing with someone who is not moved by the usual incentives, who is not constrained by the usual limitations, who has somehow removed themselves from the mechanisms that make people manageable. This person has created for themselves a position of structural independence, not through wealth, not through power, through the specific architecture of how they have built what they are building. They have no single point of failure. No critical dependency, no essential relationship that, if removed, would collapse what they have built. Everything they need, they either already have or can create. Every skill required, they either possess or can develop. Every resource necessary, they can access or substitute. They have made themselves systematically uninterdependent with any structure that could use that interdependence as leverage. The third president understands what this means. It means that all future interventions will fail for the same reason the first intervention failed. Because intervention requires dependency, and dependency has been eliminated. This president is sitting with the knowledge that what you represent is the beginning of a new category, the category of person who has removed themselves from the control systems, who operates outside the reach of the mechanisms that manage everyone else, who cannot be acquired or competed with or regulated or influenced through strategic intervention. The category of person who is structurally unmanageable. If the realization that you are unmanageable is spreading through multiple levels of power and they are all arriving at the same conclusion, type "they know now" in the comments. The sweating is not just physiological, it is political, social, economic, the visible sign that something fundamental is shifting. That the people who have been in control are encountering something their control does not extend to, that the frameworks that have worked are producing exceptions that the frameworks cannot absorb. You are the exception. Not the only one. There are others, other chosen souls activating in other territories, other people building things that operate outside the existing systems. Other individuals who have somehow achieved the specific combination of characteristics that makes them unmanageable through conventional means. But you are the one they have the most data on, the one they have tried the hardest to understand, the one they have deployed the most resources toward managing. And their efforts failed. This failure is information. Information that is spreading through networks that pay attention to this kind of thing. Information that is changing calculations about what is possible and what is controllable and what the future looks like if the category of unmanageable person is growing. The first president's sweat was noticed by people who report such things to other people who need to know such things. The fact that someone who never sweated in a meeting about someone specific is a signal that there is something about that someone that produced a response that decades of experience in managing threats did not produce before. This signal travels, gets interpreted, gets factored into other calculations about who to pay attention to and who represents genuine disruption versus ordinary competition. You have been flagged. Not as an enemy, as a phenomenon, as something that needs to be watched because it is doing things that the normal monitoring did not predict. You have been categorized internally as someone who operates outside normal parameters. This categorization changes how you are perceived, changes what resources are allocated to understanding you, changes the level at which decisions about how to respond to you are made. You are being taken seriously by people who do not take things seriously unless they have to. The second president's sweat was noticed by advisors who understand that this president does not sweat, who have been in tense situations with this president and watched this president maintain composure, who know that if composure broke, something unusual is happening. These advisors adjusted their behavior, started treating you as a higher priority situation than they were treating you before, started allocating more analytical resources to understanding what you are doing and why the existing frameworks are not producing the expected results. You have been escalated. Not in a threatening way, in an attentive way. The machinery that tracks emerging situations that might affect the political order has moved you up in its priority list, has started paying closer attention, has started asking different questions, has started treating you as something that might require new strategies rather than something that can be managed with existing strategies. You are being studied by people whose job is to understand things before they become unmanageable. The third president's sweat was private. No one witnessed it. But this president made decisions based on what it meant. Decided that the situation requires a different approach, not the approach that tries to manage you directly. The approach that accepts you cannot be managed and asks instead what the world looks like if there are people who cannot be managed and how to position accordingly. This is the deeper shift, the move from trying to control you to trying to adapt to a world where you exist uncontrolled. This is the beginning of the recalibration. The recognition that some things are not controllable and the wise response is not to keep trying to control them but to figure out how to navigate a world where they exist beyond control. You have been accepted as unmanageable. This acceptance is not surrender, it is realism. The recognition that the costs of continued attempts to manage you exceed any benefit that successful management would produce, that the resources required to contain you could be better deployed elsewhere, that the wise strategic move is not to fight the unwinnable fight but to redirect energy toward fights that can be won. If you have moved from being a problem they thought they could solve to being a reality they have to accept, type accepted in the comments. Here is what the sweating means at the deepest level. It means that power has encountered its own limit, not the limit of its resources, not the limit of its intelligence, not the limit of its will, the limit of its relevance, the boundary where the mechanisms that make power powerful stop working. The edge of the territory where the tools of power have purchase. Power is discovering that there is territory beyond that edge. Territory where people live and build and create and operate without needing what power offers, without fearing what power threatens, without responding to the incentives and constraints that power uses to shape behavior. Territory where the basic assumptions that power is built on do not hold. You are living in that territory. You did not set out to challenge power. You set out to build what you were assigned to build, and in the building, you discovered that building what you were assigned to build required operating outside the systems that power controls. Required developing capabilities that made you independent of the infrastructure that everyone else depends on. Required making choices that systematically removed the dependencies that power uses as leverage. You removed the dependencies because the dependencies were obstacles to your assignment. The removal was not ideological, it was practical. You were trying to build something. The systems that power controls were not helping you build it, were sometimes actively hindering the building, and so you found ways to build that did not require those systems, found alternatives to the resources those systems control, found methods that worked in the absence of the infrastructure those systems provide. This practical problem-solving produced strategic independence. Independence you did not seek for its own sake but discovered as a side effect of trying to complete your assignment without being stopped by the obstacles the existing systems placed in your path. And this independence is what makes you unmanageable, because management requires leverage, and leverage requires dependency. And dependency is what you eliminated in the process of building what you were trying to build. The presidents are sweating because they are encountering the implications of this. They are encountering the reality that power is not absolute, that there are people who can succeed without power's permission, that the world they thought they controlled contains territory they do not control, that the future they thought they were shaping is being shaped by forces they cannot influence. This is disorienting for people whose entire identity is built on being the ones who control and shape and influence. The first president built an identity on being able to acquire or destroy any competitor. You are the competitor who cannot be acquired and is not being destroyed. This president's identity is encountering its own limitation. The story this president tells about who they are and what they can do is being revised by your existence. The sweat is the body's response to identity revision. The second president built an identity on being able to regulate or shape any emerging force. You are the force that exists in territory where regulation has not reached and is moving faster than regulation can extend. This president's identity is encountering its own limitation. The story this president tells about the reach of political power is being revised by your example. The sweat is the body's response to discovering that power has edges. The third president built an identity on being able to see threats early and intervene effectively. You are the threat that was seen early and could not be influenced through intervention. This president's identity is encountering its own limitation. The story this president tells about the relationship between understanding and control is being revised by your immunity to influence. The sweat is the body's response to realizing that seeing clearly does not guarantee being able to shape. These presidents are not sweating because they are afraid of you personally. They are sweating because you represent something that undermines the foundation of their power. You represent proof that their power is not what they thought it was, that the mechanisms they trusted are not as reliable as they believed, that the future is not as controllable as their success in the past suggested. You represent uncertainty entering their world. And people who built everything on certainty respond to uncertainty with sweat. The sweat is the visible sign of the invisible recalibration. The recalibration of power's understanding of its own limits. The adjustment of assumptions about what can be controlled. The revision of strategies to account for categories of person who do not respond to the standard methods. The beginning of the long process of figuring out how to operate in a world where some people are unmanageable. This recalibration is happening in private, in the conversations that follow the meetings, in the reports that analyze the failures, in the strategic planning sessions that try to map the implications of having people in the world who power cannot manage. The public face of power remains composed. The public statements remain confident. The public presentation remains one of control. But in the private rooms, in the secure calls, in the late-night moments when the performance is set aside and the real assessment happens, power is sweating. Because power has encountered you. And you are the thing that the models of power did not predict would be possible. The person who power cannot acquire or compete with or regulate or influence. The builder who operates outside the system's power controls. The chosen soul who removed all the hooks. Power spent a long time believing that everyone has hooks, that everyone needs something or fears something or depends on something that power can use as leverage, that there is no such thing as a person who is structurally independent of the systems that power uses to shape behavior. You proved that belief wrong. Not through argument, through existence. through the simple fact of being someone who built something significant without needing what power offers and without fearing what power threatens, through demonstrating that the hooks are not inevitable, that dependency can be eliminated, that there is a path to achievement that does not require permission from any powerful structure. This demonstration is what produced the sweat. The visible, measurable, physiologically undeniable response of people in power encountering proof that their power is not absolute, that there are limits, that there are people beyond those limits, that the world contains territory where power does not reach and people who live in that territory and build in that territory and succeed in that territory. You are living proof that the territory exists. And power is sweating because power thought it controlled all the territory that mattered. Discovering there is territory beyond control is the deepest challenge power can face, more challenging than opposition, more challenging than competition, more challenging than any threat that operates within the frameworks power understands. Because this is the discovery that the frameworks themselves are incomplete, that the map power has been using is missing territory, that there are places people can go that power cannot follow. You went to those places. You built in those places. You succeeded in those places. And now power is sitting in its rooms, in its boardrooms and studies and secure locations, looking at the evidence of your success, and sweating. Not from fear of what you will do to them. From fear of what you represent. You represent the possibility that power's time as the primary organizer of human achievement is ending. That there is a new category of person who does not need power's organizing function, who can coordinate and build and achieve without going through the channels power controls, who can succeed without power's permission. This possibility, if it spreads, changes everything. Changes who has influence, changes what kinds of achievement are possible. Changes the relationship between the powerful and the rest, changes the basic architecture of how human societies organize themselves and how human beings achieve things that matter. Power is not sweating because of what you have done. Power is sweating because of what you prove is possible. Chosen soul, you made 3 presidents sweat. Not because you tried to, because you built what you were assigned to build in the way you were assigned to build it, because you removed the obstacles that were in your way, because you operated according to principles that power's frameworks do not account for, because you demonstrated that power's tools do not work on everyone, because you proved that there are paths to success that do not require power's permission. You are the evidence that their era is ending. Not ending tomorrow, not ending through revolution or overthrow or any dramatic collapse, ending slowly, through the accumulation of examples like you, through the multiplication of people who discover they can build without permission, through the spreading recognition that the hooks are optional, that dependency can be eliminated. That there is territory beyond power's reach and that territory is where the future is being built. The 3 presidents are sweating because they see this. They see you as the early signal of a trend they cannot stop, the first visible example of a category that will multiply, the proof of concept that will be replicated by others who see what you did and realize they can do it too. You are the beginning of their end. Not their destruction, their obsolescence, the slow recognition that what they offer is no longer necessary, that people can succeed without them, That the future is being built in territory they do not control by people they cannot manage using methods they do not understand. They see this coming. And they are sweating. To understand what happens when power discovers it cannot reach you and begins adapting to a world where you exist beyond its control, watch the video on your screen right now. The territory beyond their reach is expanding.